Does the triglyceride to HDL ratio matter? Does HDL matter? Do triglycerides even matter? Let's dive deep. Anybody that answers this question with like a quick answer, like yes or no, triglycerides to LDL ratio or HDL ratio, the only thing that matters, anybody who answers that quickly, without any nuance, without any in-depth explanation, without any background information, probably just doesn't know enough about this or is just lying to you. They're pretending to be some type of expert when they actually aren't. I'm Dr. Allo. I'm a double board certified cardiologist. I actually wrote the book on cholesterol. Now, I obviously had some tremendous help writing this with one of the world's leading lipidologists, but definitely when somebody answers a question as just a yes or no, and you'll see this a lot in social media with almost any topic, when somebody just says, yes, that is true, or no, that is not true, with no nuance, no explanation, no detail, they're generally somebody that has no idea what they're doing. So let's talk about triglycerides real quick. So this is a lipoprotein particle. This may be an HDL, a IDL, a LDL, a VLDL, whatever it might be, a LDL. The inside of it, you've got yellow, which is the cholesterol, and you've got the turquoise color, which are the triglycerides. Now, different lipoproteins serve different purposes. The question comes down to, what do the triglycerides do and what are they used for? So triglycerides are fatty acids. You eat fatty acids, they need to be digested. Your intestines secrete them into chylomicrons. Eventually, it's a very long, complicated process. Get the book if you want to dive into the details of how cholesterol is metabolized, how it's, transported, what it does, and etc. The chylomicrons go out first and distribute the consumed triglycerides to your fat tissue and your muscles. First, they go to muscles. If muscles need energy, they go and drop them off there. Then they go to fat tissue and deliver the rest of the fat or energy to storage units called adipocytes or adipocytes. These are fat cells. The adipocytes are like the fat you see in your body. They get stored there, then the chylomicrons go to the liver and ultimately get, destroyed and put back together again. Now, the liver also can put out things called VLDLs, or very low density lipoproteins, which eventually shrink down and become IDLs, which are intermediate density, and then LDLs, which are low density lipoproteins. Now, the main role of low-density lipoproteins is actually to go find an HDL particle. This is an HDL. They connect together with something called CETP, or cholesterol ester transfer protein. They connect together, and the HDL particle gives the LDL particle its cholesterol. The HDL's primary role is to go to arteries and delipidate or take away the cholesterol out of the foam cells or the macrophages. Inside the artery, you have these foam cells where too much LDL has dropped off cholesterol and has caused a problem. HDLs go and get it, and they give it back to LDLs in something called indirect reverse cholesterol transfer or transport, and send it back to the liver to go get eliminated. That is one of the main goals of HDL. Now, you may wonder, so why do LDLs contain cholesterol? It's more of a structural thing to kind of keep it inflated. Otherwise, it'll be like a flat discoid, flatbed truck, or a flat ballooned, deflated ball almost. The cholesterol there is for structure. LDL's job is never to go deliver triglycerides, ever. What it does is the reason it has triglycerides even is to just give it to HDLs so that HDLs can give it cholesterol, and then these take the cholesterol back to the liver for elimination, processing, what have you. So now the question becomes, what about this triglyceride to HDL ratio? So there's several problems with using that as a surrogate for anything. So there are scenarios where you can use both HDL and triglycerides separately to identify certain things like metabolic syndrome. For example, people have metabolic syndrome, and the criteria for metabolic syndrome was invented like 1981 or 1982. So it's very, very old. We have much better ways of assessing whether or not somebody has metabolic health or metabolic dysfunction. But high triglycerides was one of the criteria, and low HDL was too. Now, the reason people with generally high triglycerides have low HDL cholesterol is because the cholesterol inside the HDL particles is being replaced with triglycerides. They're triglyceride rich or cholesterol poor. Now, if this is way too sciencey, I'll try to break it down a little bit simpler later. So when these people come online and they're like, well, if your triglyceride to HDL ratio is above 2 or lower than 1 or above this or above that, it's very problematic. First of all, triglycerides may have nothing to do with what this person has. Now, generally speaking, people with higher triglycerides generally have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes or obesity, alcohol drinking problems. They may just have genetically high triglycerides. They may have hypertriglyceridemia. Anybody with an LDL or a triglyceride level over 499, like 500 and up, usually has something called primary hypertriglyceridemia and needs to be treated very aggressively because it could destroy your pancreas and cause pancreatitis, which ultimately could lead to pancreatic cancer. So that's a different story. I've already given a lecture on that. Go look up my triglyceride lecture. So let's get back to the ratios. So back in the old days, when they first did the Framingham study, they noticed that people with low HDL cholesterol. Now notice when we're measuring HDL cholesterol, let's say this is an HDL molecule, we're measuring the actual yellow that's inside it, the yellow that is inside it. When they looked at HDL cholesterol and they noticed that people with lower HDL cholesterol seem to have more heart disease, or people with higher HDL cholesterol seem to have higher heart disease. And they thought that this kind of held up, but they never corrected for LDL cholesterol, because at every HDL level, if your ApoB or your LDL cholesterol is higher, and ApoB is the blue structural protein that kind of holds together the LDL particles. So if your ApoB is elevated, you have more particles. It's the particle concentration gradient that is the problem in general. The cholesterol that's in it also is a problem because it means you have more cholesterol. And generally speaking, if you have high ApoB, you have high LDL cholesterol. So those generally run together. But if there's a little bit of a discordance, the ApoB is the problem and correlates more with the actual heart disease and cardiovascular outcomes. So they noticed that people had lower HDL or higher HDL seem to have more or less, cardiovascular problems. They never corrected for ApoB, never corrected for LDL cholesterol. They've since gone back and said, well, look, this doesn't make a lot of sense because, people who have really high HDL have dysfunctional HDL, and every medication we've ever used to raise HDL never seemed to make a difference. We've used estrogen, we've used CETP inhibitors, we've used niacin, we've used fibrates, for example. All of these medications raise HDL astronomically sometimes without affecting very much else, and we did not notice a concomitant change in cardiovascular outcomes or anything, sometimes worsened outcomes like niacin, for example. It was probably the most potent medication at raising HDL, CETP inhibitors too, but raising HDL to astronomical levels, like taking somebody from a 40 or 50 up to like 120, 160, what have you, worsened outcomes. Niacin turns out that its metabolites are toxic. It makes the HDL particles more atherogenic, and it had much worse outcomes. So we realized that must not be the issue because we're raising HDL cholesterol, or the HDL that's inside, the cholesterol that's inside of HDL particles, that is going up, but it's not making a difference. So we're not actually, the HDL particles are not going to the arteries and taking out cholesterol that's there. They're just not being able to dump their own cholesterol, which is dysfunctional. That means the HDL particles are not actually working. So when you have dysfunctional HDL or super high HDL, you have problems. There have been studies that have shown, and I'll put all the studies up here as we kind of discuss them. One study showed that people with an HDL cholesterol over 120 actually had a 27% increase in dementia, which is obviously not good and not what we want. Back to the ratios. So another study wanted to answer this exact question. Does a triglyceride to HDL ratio even make a difference? Now, obviously people with high triglycerides will have more metabolic dysfunction. They're more likely to have insulin resistance. In fact, people with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes will have higher triglycerides in general. Not always. If it's well controlled, obviously not. But if it's not well controlled, they will have higher triglycerides. So they went back and looked, what if we lowered triglycerides? What if we did this? How does it compare? There was a study of 347,000 people that looked at all of the various lipid markers and how they correlate with heart disease and whatnot. They found that triglycerides in and of themselves, while they did correlate somewhat with, metabolic disease, heart disease, some increased CV risk, when you correct for ApoB, those associations were no longer relevant. Now, put that exact conclusion right here. When you took people with high triglycerides, low triglycerides, medium triglycerides, all levels of triglycerides, if you corrected for ApoB, the associations no longer were relevant and the associations no longer really mattered. But ApoB did. We already know that. ApoB, based on every single study that's ever been done, if you took all the studies and didn't cherry pick any of them, and you put them all into a database, like I've shown this chart multiple times, if you took every study that has ever been done on LDL cholesterol or ApoB and put it in a database, don't cherry pick studies, don't make up your own meta-analysis, don't try to sway the data one way or another. You put it all in one giant big study, this is what you end up with, that ApoB is literally the only thing that matters. The other problem with using HDL as a denominator, the problem is you have a small denominator that could be anywhere from like 20 up to maybe 50 or 60, and you have bigger numerators. You have like triglycerides that could be anywhere from like 15 to 20 up to 400, 500, 1,000. There's too much variance and too much error rates. The error rates are too high. HDL can vary depending on age, race, ethnicity, whether or not you're in menopause or not. The problem with HDL is it cannot be used reliably as a denominator in any equation because it varies so much. African Americans, women, Caucasians, Hispanics, people from Middle Eastern backgrounds, the HDLs vary too much to be a reliable measure of anything. Now, if you want to say, well, only in this little population of Caucasians from this one little region in Italy, it matters. Okay, I could see that, but still you're jumping to a wide conclusion based on a small amount of data. So generally speaking, triglyceride to HDL ratio does not really tell us about your risk. Triglycerides alone tell us you may have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, which in and of itself increases your cardiovascular risk. There's no doubt about that. Watch some of my other videos. If you have high ApoB and uncontrolled diabetes, you have a 2 to 3 times higher risk, but that's with anything, and hypertension, and smoking, and lack of exercise, and lack of fruits and vegetables, and whatever. You're stacking on higher and higher risk, but you must have that underlying high ApoB or high LDL cholesterol, and then stacking on anything on top of that just makes it worse and worse and worse. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in these kind of topics, that you go and grab Cholesterol Truths. No other book has as much in-depth information. Now, I'm just barely scratching the surface of these 2 chapters. There's a chapter in here called Triglyceride to HDL ratio. Do ratios matter? There's another chapter following that directly, talking about HDL and how too high or too low of an HDL can be dysfunctional. Another study that was done looked at people with genetically something called hypoalpha lipoproteinemia. These are people with very low HDLs. We're talking like they live their entire lives with an HDL under 15. These people have a SCRB1 receptor mutation. They have HDL cholesterols of like 10 to 15 their entire lives. And they still get atherosclerosis. So that is not something that we view as like, it might be a thing, it might not be a thing. Does it incur risk? Does it add risk? Does it take away risk? No, HDL levels, super high levels, either genetically induced or chemically, medically induced, didn't seem to make a difference. In fact, it was actually dysfunctional, and people with super low levels really didn't make a difference. And the problem is there's way too many genetic variations to be able to use that as anything. Can you use it as a surrogate for maybe, is your diabetes well controlled? Is your metabolic health in check? Kind of. Still not that accurate for that because, like I said, African Americans, women, certain populations, the levels are way different than the norms or the majority of people that we look at or include in studies. So it's not a reliable marker for that either. And like I said, when you correct for ApoB, the HDL goes away, the triglycerides goes away. All of those associations are not as relevant as ApoB, so why not use ApoB? Like literally, instead of using the cholesterol inside HDL particles, if we use the ApoB on LDL particles, you have an exact measurement of your risk that has been validated and proven over time. Why would you not use the best overall marker, the best way of assessing risk, the best way of figuring out if you're going to have a cardiovascular event or not, when you're using like these surrogates or these other markers that are not super reliable, vary way too much by genetics and ethnicity, and are not the best thing. So either way, you like stuff like this, download the Dr. Allo app. Go to your app store, type in Dr. Allo, download the app. There are tons of lectures and other lectures similar to this on hypertension, diabetes, losing weight in pregnancy, losing weight in general, EKG masterclass if you want to learn how to read EKGs or ECGs like a cardiologist, that's in there. Cardiac emergencies for cardiac physicians, EKG emergencies, POTS syndrome, all that kind of stuff is being added pretty much every day. It's free for now, so go download it. Hopefully, if you're still watching this video in the future, they're all still mostly free. Definitely go do that. Join my community. If you type in the code 1 month, go to drallo.net/community, type in the code 1 month. You're going to love it in there. We meet every Monday on Zoom. You can text and type and talk to me all day, all night through the app, through the Dr. Allo app. But I think you'll love it. So definitely go grab all that stuff. I'll put the links below, and I will catch you in the next episode.